Hi. So I was recently fortunate enough to be able to go see the Hunchback of Notre-Dame musical at the White Plains Performing Arts Center in New York. It was super great, and here are some of my thoughts on the show. Before we go any further, please be warned that this video does contain spoilers for the Hunchback of Notre-Dame musical, for the Notre-Dame de Paris novel by Victor Hugo, and for the 1992 Disney movie, Hunchback of Notre-Dame, and by association, a bunch of the many other Hunchback of Notre-Dame adaptations that came from the novel before the Disney movie too. Alright, so I admit I did not look up basically anything about the show before I went to see it. I knew that it existed because I knew Chiara Renee had played Esmeralda, but I didn't really know anything else. I knew that it followed the Disney music a lot, so I was expecting the story to be the same as the Disney movie. So I was really surprised when it started to realize that even though they did sort of follow the general storyline of the Disney movie, they drew in a lot of additional elements from the book. So right away, they introduce us to not only Frollo, but Frollo's younger brother, Jehan, who he loves, which, that, to me, I was immediately like, oh man, they're taken from the book. So then, Jehan is Quasimodo's biological father that he has with a gypsy. And so then it's sort of like the reason that Frollo ends up raising Quasimodo is because it's his beloved brother's final request, and there's this sort of family obligation where he's like, oh, I may not have been able to save my brother from dying, but I will save this thing. Even though, that's like a real Petunia Dursley sort of caring, right?
You didn't just lose a mother that night in Godric's Hollow, you know. I lost a sister.
So instead of Quasimodo just being like a random stranger baby that he had to take in because God was watching, like in the Disney movie, it's like this family obligation. Although, they do still have that bit where he's totally about to throw the baby to death, and then he collapses under the weight of the eyes of Notre Dame, so take that as you will. And, another thing I'd like to point out, he was like super excited to find out that his brother had a baby and was totally ready to love it until he saw its face. And then he was all, oh no, it's a monster! It's your punishment for being a sinner! Like, what a jerk, right? So then he has this idea that he's gonna raise Quasimodo to be super righteous and religious like him instead of being a sinner like Jehan, who was, just some sort of party hard boy. And this is where Frollo's weird twisted motivation comes in. He's like, I want to save Jehan's son from meeting the same fate of sin and keep him away from evil gypsy women and blah, blah, blah. He's a monster. I'm an asshole. Something else that they drew from the book that I really liked was that they kept in Quasimodo being deaf. And they even had some limited sign language going on. Like, there was a part where Quasimodo was even showing Esmeralda some signs. And honestly, I spent like the entire time thinking about how well this show could translate into a deaf production. Plus, I know in the original English cast of this, Michael Arden played Quasimodo. Michael Arden obviously later went on to direct the Deaf West Spring Awakening production. And in an interview with NBC New York in 2015, he did actually say that he was the one who incorporated some sign language into the role because he's worked with the deaf community in the past, and he thought that Quasimodo being deaf would have a way to be talking to people. I was just thinking, like, this would be really great. I wonder, though, like, how would Quasimodo know sign language? Like, Frollo obviously isn't going to teach him because he's an asshole. He'd be like that guy who's discouraging sign language and keeps turning away while he's speaking. Quasimodo can't even see his mouth, and it's just really frustrating. But it wouldn't be unbelievable for Esmeralda or the gypsies to know it, and, like, that would add a whole nother layer about Esmeralda being the first kind person that Quasimodo talks to. She even, like, she uses sign language with him instead of being like Frollo. Anyway, I really liked that they kept that part in, too. Now, the characterization on Phoebus is a good example of how they were sort of melding the Disney movie and Victor Hugo's novel. His personality was very much a sort of mix. He wasn't his total Gaston-like personality from the novel, and he wasn't really his super chivalrous sort of personality from the movie, but it was sort of like, I mean, he was sort of a total fuckboy, is just down to get busy and party, but he also has this whole other element. He's running from his memories of the horrors of war, and that's why he goes along with Frollo for so long, because he wants to stay here in Paris as the cathedral guard instead of being sent back to the front. And then, of course, when he's faced with the choice to either keep his job and his reputation or to set a fire and burn down the brothel, he chooses to be a good person. And also, symbolically, there was this whole thing where they had said earlier that the torch fire won't go out as long as they're still searching for Esmeralda to arrest her, so then he extinguishes the torch, and it's this whole thing. Plus, there's this whole part later when they're warning the gypsies that Frollo's coming for them, and they're all saying, oh, we gotta leave, we gotta run away, and he does this thing where he offers to go with Esmeralda because he loves her, and he's like, instead of trying to make her stay with him, he's like, I'll go with you, I'll just join your gypsy troupe because I want to be with you. So that was pretty nice. Alright, and then, of course, obviously, the biggest change in the show has got to be the way they ended it. And I would just like to take this moment to remind everyone that this video contains massive spoilers. So if you decide to watch this despite the spoiler warning at the beginning because you don't really care about little details or whatever, but you maybe don't want to be spoiled for the entire ending of the show, this is your spoiler reminder. And you can mute your video right now, and I'll throw up a big sign on the screen when I am done talking about ending spoilers. Alright, anyway. So, again, they sort of follow the general storyline from the Disney movie, but they draw in a lot of the elements from the book. And with the show, they do even sort of flip more towards that, or a lot of things that happen in the book happen here. They just don't play out in the same way, necessarily. Frollo, he doesn't just sort of tell Esmeralda at the stake, like he does in the movie, to give herself to him or burn, but he actually does this whole thing where he visits her in her cell the night before to give her time to agonize over it. And as motivation, he kind of tells her that he could, if she gives herself to him, he might let Phoebus go. He won't kill Phoebus, you know. Plus, he high-key tries to rape her while she screams to the guards for help from the demon attacking her. So, yeah. He then kind of has Phoebus thrown in there with her for her to see what she might be condemning, and then he has orders to the guard to get Phoebus out. But the guard still has respect and camaraderie for Phoebus, so he kind of lets them talk all night, and that sort of ruins Frollo's plan to let Esmeralda stew in her agony over, you know, possibly being able to save her love. And they have this whole thing where Phoebus is like, don't you dare do anything for my sake, but please do everything you have to do to keep yourself alive. And she's like, no, I'd never give myself to him for my life. She's like, I might do it for you, but ew, I don't want to. That's too high a price to pay for my own life. And they're like sacrificing for each other, kind of, which is pretty nice. Esmeralda, and this is where we differ a lot from the movie, this is something that you may have been thinking. I certainly was the entire show, and so was my friend who was seeing it, just wondering, so is she gonna die? And
spoiler alert!
She does. Instead of her dying the way that they do it in the book, what they did is they took the same kind of scene from the movie where she was burning and there was smoke inhalation and all that stuff, and Quasimodo totally thought she died. Remember that scene in the Disney movie? They still had that plot line happen, but in this version she actually was dead after that. And he did that whole raging at Frollo for being a monster, but he wasn't stopped by Esmeralda waking up. He kept going, and then he straight up murdered Frollo. And it was really chilling, honestly. I know that everyone's all like, oh, justice, right? But the way that they had it was very kind of dark and scary. It was flat out seemed pretty revenge-like, and he had this whole chilling callback line where he was all like, I told you, master, I'm strong. Like, oh, it's like when Harry Potter is all,
you're lying, Dolores. And one mustn't tell lies.
But Harry does not then kill Umbridge, whereas Quasimodo definitely murders Frollo. And then they have that whole tragic novel ending where he looks over at Esmeralda's body and, you know, off the ledge where Frollo just got flung to his death, and he says that there lies all that I've ever loved, and then that whole thing about them finding his skeleton, holding her skeleton in the grave many years later. They kept all that. And there were a whole bunch of families in the theater with small children who definitely went there because they were expecting some sort of Disney on Broadway kind of show, and that is not what they got. Yeah. Anyway, spoilers for the ending over now. Alright? If you muted your video at this point, you can turn it back on. Alright, now I'm going to talk about some theatrical adaptation elements of the show that I really liked. So, first of all, we've got the Jester as an MC, and he was always on stage pretty much, even in scenes where it might not make sense for the Jester character to be on stage. He was clearly, in those times, acting as a silent observer MC, and the actor that we saw playing him, Jared Biron Green, I hope I pronounced that right, he was so good. He was super into it. You could just tell that he was having so much fun with the role, and that, you know, really just added to the atmosphere a lot, so that was great. Another thing that I really loved was that during his scenes when he was alone, talking to the statues, or during soliloquies, Quasimodo would stand up straight and talk clearly. And then in scenes with other people would be when he was contorting his body and he had this really slurred, broken speech pattern. And the first scene that we get with him is a long conversation with the statues. So it has this real weight when Frollo eventually comes in and Quasimodo just transforms in front of our eyes. So I thought that was really cool and a great way to show his mind and remind the audience that people are going to see him as this other, but you're introduced to him exactly just like anybody else you would see on the street, and you are reminded suddenly, oh right, this is about the Hunchback of Notre-Dame, and everyone is very judgmental of him. But it's a great way to remind the audience of what's really going on here.
You know, Quasimodo has disabilities, like, and in that time period, they were not, you know, that was like a unholy thing. But, you know, now science has kind of taught us that they're people just like us, and, you know, I hope that this will help people to see that.
Speaking of the statues, they were a really great element. They were really well done. They added a lot to the flow of the story, to understanding Quasimodo as a character. They were kind of like the ghost of Connor Murphy as a plot element, instead of being, you know, terrible like they were in the Disney movie.
All right. Pour the wine and cut the cheese.
So, A+ on that, really. The performance was really great. The staging was excellent. Unfortunately, I did see the show right near the end of their run at White Plains, or else I would recommend that you go see that particular production. But definitely, if it's running anywhere near you now or in the future, I would recommend going to see it. I'm not going to say, oh, if you're not with kids or something like that, because let's be honest, guys, children already know there are dragons. I saw Les Mis for the first time when I was 11, and it did not scar me for life. But everyone is different, every child is different, it's up to your discretion on what's too mature. If you did get a chance to go see Hunchback, either this White Plains version or a different production, or even one of the original runs at La Jolla Playhouse or at the Paper Mill Playhouse, please let me know what you thought in the comments, what you liked, what you didn't like. When it comes to live theater, every performance is different, and I love to hear about all the different types of things that people pick up on in various showings. Like if this actor was really into this scene one night, or they played that moment a little bit differently on this other night. Anyway, that was my theater review of the Hunchback of Notre-Dame musical. Until next time, guys. Bye!